You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 261 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Today we're in East Sussex, and my guest is Sinead Fenton, who runs a horticultural business growing edible flowers and herbs on 4.5 acres. That's 1.8 hectares for any of you metric lot of land which she currently rents. The most popular flowers include, well, she's going to put me right here, I'm sure, but according to her Just Farmers site, it says the most popular flowers include nasturtiums, borage, gladioli, and roses, and herbs range from chives and dill to the more unusual lemon verbena. Really like lemon verbena, Thai basil, and pineapple sage, which I have not come across. In addition to producing flowers and herbs, she's planted over 5,000 trees since being at the site. These include an orchard of 50 fruit trees, a mix of heritage varieties in danger of extinction, and ancient varieties from the area. Sinead didn't start her career with growing, though. She did a degree in environmental geology and had a deeply held fascination with the Earth's natural resources. And this led to getting a job in the mining industry. I'm intrigued by that. So we will touch on that, no doubt. A year later, she took redundancy, and sparked by an interest in environmental issues and food waste, she went on to work in different sustainable food areas before deciding that the best way to make change was to start from the ground, literally. In 2016, she started volunteering at a social enterprise allotment growing food for restaurants in London, and in 2017 took over her current plot. And today we'll hear a little more about that journey. Sinead, it is great to have you on the show. Welcome to Meet the Farmers.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. And yeah, wow, what an introduction.
Well,
I think I could live up.
I'm sure you will. I'm always intrigued with people who have a slightly different route into growing or farming. So you definitely have that. So yeah, I am intrigued. But before we talk about you, just introduce us to the business as it stands today. I've sort of listed some of the things you're growing, but what are you growing? What does the land look like? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's 4.5 acres, like you mentioned, and probably about an acre of it is in kind of full-time production, just go all the time. And that's mostly made up of edible flowers. So the business started 4 years ago, and it was a bit of everything. It was veg, it was flowers, it was cut flowers, edible flowers, herbs. And that was really in a response to lockdown, because the core of the business of what we wanted to do was edible flowers. But that became a little bit difficult. So ended up doing quite a few different things, and have kind of slowly moved back into just being edible flowers, garnishing greens. So it'll be things like, you see kind of in your gardens if you're growing, or if, you get veg, it's things like rocket. I let it bolt. So rocket flowers, they're really popular in the spring. Things like borage, that's quite a cucumbery type of flower, really loved by chefs, really small. That's really popular, great for wildlife. And things like herbs, so things like coriander, fennel, rosemary, dill. I just let them all go to flower and then basically pick the flowers. And really it was kind of started from just not being a very good veg grower. Everything kept bolting. So it was like, all right, maybe I'm
sure not that.
Yeah, I'm good at that bit. I'm good at not looking after plants. Whereas, now it's like, I built a business around it. But yeah, that's essentially the business is edible flowers, mostly going to restaurants and cake makers up and down the country. And then there's, over the last year, have been developing like a preserved side, so drying flowers, pressing flowers, and those go global. So I've sent things as far as like Bahrain, I've sent stuff to Latvia, Estonia, And because it's dried, it means that the packaging's different. So kind of like taps into more the sustainable side of things, which is great as well. And yeah, then the rest of the site, the kind of rest of the 3.5 acres is kind of made up of some of the more long-term work. So there's 1.5 acres of woodland at the back. So someone will get to enjoy that one day, hopefully. There's like a willow coppice. There's, like a nut tree corridor, so a corridor of hazelnuts, which I will never see. It will just be squirrel food. And then walnut trees, which I don't think walnut trees do anything for about 25 years, and I'll probably be long gone by that point. I don't know. I'm very haggard this year.
I mean, I should also say we are recording this episode at the end of August, which is of course peak time for you.
Yeah, peak time. So it's been pretty relentless the last couple of months, like June, July, and August basically make up probably about more than half of like the year's income. So it's just relentless, and we're on the end of August now. So my ability to function has really dropped. But yeah, that's kind of the farm in essence. Started out with kind of trying out a few different things, selling to different places, hustling a bit because bitten off this thing of just like, oh, I've got this farm now, got to make it work. But the passion has always been the flowers, and that's what it started out as. And it's nice to kind of be evolving into this new side of the business with the preserved and dried stuff, and that hopefully will build in a bit more security into the business as well. Kind of moving towards more of a long-term stock basis, rather than having so much rely on fresh produce in such a short window. And I think this year in particular, with how bad the weather's been, there's been a real wake-up call of like, got to look at other ways to build in resilience into this business model.
Yeah, I mean, on that, how have you found this year? Because, I mean, no matter what area of farming or growing you're working in, everyone has had their challenges. Everyone has their own story. What's it been like for you?
How long have we got?
We've got about an hour, but
yeah, okay, cool. Well, here's an hour.
Maybe not all on this question.
Weather. Opened up the can of worms, and it's been tough. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I do feel like I say most years this is the worst year ever, and I do actually mean it this year. And I'm not saying it flippantly, like I feel like I have done, reflecting on previous years, which have felt really easy in comparison. It's just been, it feels like it's been October for months on end. It's been really cold. The spring was a really cold, wet start, so germination of plants was really tricky. The light levels were really, really bad. So things were slow to start. And then it's just been a very wet and humid year, which means at the moment I'm now suffering with issues like mildew and rust, stuff that I wouldn't really expect until, say, September. So everything is kind of almost like a month and a half in advance of kind of calling it quits. Like in terms of like plants not looking how they should. And just the rain has been really, really relentless. So a lot of plants that I rely on, so things like mint, for instance, I do a lot of mint tips for like cocktail bars and bartenders. I've not been able to touch this year. I've got like huge patches of it, which are just suffering with rust because the ground has been so wet over the winter and it just hasn't really dried out.
Okay, that is interesting because without wanting this to become an episode of Gardener's Question Time, I'm experiencing exactly the same thing with my mint, and I was going to ask you how to avoid that, but clearly there is no way.
Yeah, I was actually talking to another herb grower this morning, and we were just having a bit of a what's going on, and we were both moaning about mint in particular. So it doesn't like to be really wet. So if it's in the ground, it's just a bit tricky. So for me this year, it's in the ground. So it's got way too much water work. So it's got all these kind of like mottled marks on it. Looks like a bit like rust or like something's been nipping at it.
Yeah.
Some people say if you've got it in pots, apparently you can take out runners, and in the spring, you can put boiling water over the runners. I only heard this today, so do not take my word.
Right. Okay. I'm going to try this.
And apparently that kind of helps almost like boil out the because it's a fungal disease. So if it's in the soil, basically a lot of fungal diseases are in the soil. They just need the right conditions for it to kind of become a problem. And the right conditions are humid and hot. But if you can almost kind of burn it out, that's been something someone had suggested to me, and I said, I've got like a 20-meter patch of it, or 20 square meter patch of it. I can't boil all of that. I've just got to suck it up. Cutting it right back to the base also helps. What I've found is I've had to do it a few times, but I've cut it back really, really hard.
Yeah.
Like right down to the ground. And then I get kind of new fresh growth, which is all right for kind of like 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Once it starts growing back, but then it will get the rust again if the like ground is so wet. So it's just more of you just got to keep cutting it back if you've got it in the ground, and if you've got it in the pot, just try and keep it as dry as possible. But if you're not getting hit by rust, you'll be getting hit by the flea beetle, which is really nice as well, and just munching away at it. So some years you get a good year for a plant, other years you don't. And I just think it's just not a good one for mint, which is unfortunate because the patch looks amazing. It's just when you actually look at it closely, it's quite upsetting.
Well, that is frustrating. My other question, I'm just going to slide this one in, and then we will we will get back to it. But it's with nasturtiums in terms of like so many caterpillars, and I'm guessing you must have this issue. But how do you prevent those butterflies from hatching those eggs? And how do you avoid the caterpillars?
I have struggled with this. So I have 2 patches. I have a patch in the polytunnel, and it's really, really hot in there. And I think it's too hot in there for them. So absolutely pristine, look great, haven't been touched. I've got 2 beds outside that are massive. And as soon as you get one that's laid their egg, and unless you spot them, like the best thing is, look, if you see the eggs, get rid of them. And that's kind of really the only way. But if they want it, they'll get it.
Yeah, they are relentless, and there's so many of them, and they just eat it all.
Yeah, they're really rampant. I went away for a weekend, and on Friday I do my harvest list to tell everyone this is what I've got. I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nasturtiums. I came back on Sunday, and the entire patch outside was gone. They just seen to the whole thing. Luckily, I've got the patch inside, so I'm relying on that now, which they haven't found. But yeah, there is probably good advice out there. I don't have it. Other than just if you've got a small enough patch, just try and keep an eye out for them, and then just get rid of them as soon as you see them, or remove them.
Grand. And that is this episode of Gardener's Question Time over.
Yeah. Basically, I have
sorry
no
about
answers, and this is the year where I have questioned everything, and I just think I'm not entirely sure I know anything. There's been so many wild cards this year with the weather and the climate and pests. But I'm not the only one. I think each week I talk to a different grower, and everybody is a little bit perplexed as to what is going on. So there's a bit of reassurance in that.
Yeah, it's been quite a year, that's for sure. Tell us a bit about your part of East Sussex, and sort of what the local area is like.
Yeah, Sussex, it's really lovely. I got the memo when I moved here that it was sunny Sussex. Eastbourne is the sunshine state. I didn't get the memo about it being windy. So it's very windy here. And the farm kind of sits on one of the last hills of the South Downs, which I think is also part of why it's so wet here and why there's so much moisture here, because of, I guess, kind of airflow. Usually after a set of hills in a lower lying area, you kind of get this kind of dampness. And I think that's where we sit. So yeah, it's a very pretty place. Soil, people probably heard of the Wealden clay or Sussex clay, which is very good for pottery, not so good for growing. So it's, the conditions are pretty tough, actually. Very, very windy, quite extreme, very exposed, and really, really bad soil.
Yeah, perfect for horticulture then.
Yeah, my original plan was to go to Scotland, and I've got friends in Scotland who are having a much better time growing than down in Sussex, which is supposed to have the most light hours and the like best heat. But apparently not, or at least
Yeah.
not anymore since I moved down here. But it's a nice spot, and I guess the proximity to London is really helpful for the type of stuff that like we specialise in, edible flowers. There's so many restaurants in London. They're the type of places that are using this type of stuff as well. So it's positioned really well to like even Brighton is, it's a mini version of London. So in terms of like access to market, it is pretty perfect.
Yeah. So just with your soil, just to do some soil geeking for a bit, I'm guessing you had to do quite a bit of work in those early years to improve its condition.
Yeah. So when we first started, we started as no dig. So had put down silage tarps, brought in quite a bit of like green waste compost. I, in hindsight, actually wish we did it differently, and I think it was partly because we did come in with not a huge amount of knowledge and probably quite naive, and farming was not the background, and came from a community gardening background, so almost to scale that style of growing up to this. Maybe in hindsight wasn't the best way to do things, and like that hindsight you learn further on that maybe things could have been done a bit different. Like I probably would have focused maybe a little bit more on actually not trying to get as much space open to grow on, but so we did everything, the whole design of the plan, we did the whole thing. Was actually maybe bit by bit, and use actual like growing green manures. But just didn't have the knowledge to do that. So how we had started was no dig. And I think also the conditions, if the soil was better, I think it does work in the right context. I just think the context wasn't right here because it's very, very heavy compacted soil. And I think maybe didn't really appreciate how badly compacted it was. So what's kind of happened is the compost is just almost kind of sat on top, and that's full of worms, full of life. Even the wood chip as well. We used a lot of wood chip just to try and get a lot of get carbon into the ground, and that's teeming with life, but it's just sitting on top of the soil in parts, like in the actual growing beds. In the other areas, where we've done a lot of tree planting and we've just kind of basically left the kind of grass to grow, die down year on year. That ground is actually becoming better. This year I did break up the ground with rotavating some of the beds, and that was partly because of an injury. So I couldn't actually like work the bed and get into it.
Oh, gosh. You really have had quite a year.
It's not been great. Yeah, I had a car crash, but then I also had a fall. So like I got whiplash and hurt my right shoulder. And then in the fall, I hurt my left shoulder, which crushed into my chest, and I cracked my ribs, and like all my chest muscles were out of place. So I was out of action that happened in January. Then the second accident happened at the start of February. So I was pretty much like bedbound until mid-April. Couldn't really lift anything until like May, which is why by that point, like things had kind of dried out a bit, and I couldn't get into the ground. So I needed to do something. But the rotavating, it has kind of helped with the mixing. So obviously I've paid the sacrifice in terms of maybe some of the soil life, but maybe it's helped in the structure, and hopefully the soil life will bounce back. Given the changes that we're seeing in those kind of like top layers quite quickly, starting no dig, I'm hoping that maybe, having to kind of make this compromise to actually get on with the year, will pay off. I don't know. I think it will be a little while before I see the implications of making that decision.
Yeah. And the trees, in terms of benefit to you in some ways, I'm guessing both shelter and some drainage. There's some drainage potential benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first moved here in 2020, it was just so flooded. And the last 2 winters have been really, really bad in terms of rainfall and flooding. Especially like I've noticed it where in the polytunnels, like there's literally been streams. So the amount of rainfall has been super, super intense, but it has drained really quickly. And at the beginning, or that kind of first year when we'd first made all the beds, because we grow with like permanent beds, just for like context. And so if it would rain, it would sometimes take like a couple of days for it to actually drain away. Whereas, now those really, really heavy downpours, you get a little bit of pooling, but a couple of hours later it's gone. So it's definitely been heading in the right direction. And I think the trees and the roots have done a lot. And there's a lot of trees, planted a hell of a lot of things like willows, which suck up a lot of moisture as well. So that's really helped. And I've seen the difference, from that in terms of how heavy the rainfall's been over the last, especially this winter and this summer, where it's just not stopped raining since September last year.
Yeah, it's been mad. Agroforestry in action. Always good to hear about. Let's turn more towards your route into the industry. So let's go way back first of all. Tell me about sort of life growing up and what sparked your interest in the environment and the outdoors.
Yeah, so I'm from East London. You can probably tell because I don't pronounce my T's. I've got no respect for the letter T. But yeah, I grew up in East London. So urban. Didn't really know anything about farming at all. Food was just there because it was just there in cities, in like shops and whatnot. And it was never, you never really thought about anything before that. I went to uni in Leicester, and that was kind of where things started opening up a bit. Like I'd moved to this, it's still a city, but you go through the train and you see fields and stuff, and it's just a little bit
smaller than London.
Yeah, a lot smaller as well. But I always, like growing up, I always loved being outdoors. I was very much like a nature kid. Really loved going to the forest, and just, kind of being in those types of environments. I always felt more comfortable there than I did in the actual city. And I think I had quite an interest in, it's really weird, but like as a kid, I really loved watching shows about tunnels and making tunnels.
Okay.
Really obscure. I was an only child.
That's a niche childhood interest.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of time to fill as an only child. So, tried out a lot of different interests, but that's probably what sparked the interest in geology.
Right.
And I was really interested in how they would like get through these mountains, like with this, and make holes through them. I found it fascinating.
It is pretty cool.
It's really cool, but don't get me started.
I won't.
So yeah, I think that's just with like this kind of real love for nature. I really love being outdoors, and I wanted to see more of the world, and geology was that way to do it. So when I went to uni in Leicester, I went and studied geology, which was quite wild card, but I loved it. I got to travel to incredible places. But I did economic and applied environmental geology, which is a long word for mining geology,
right.
Which is, I guess, maybe it's not, a lot of people don't like that. So, or aren't waving the flag and a fan of mining. So
yeah, let's you down in Cornwall, because they have a whole school of mining, don't they? Down in Cornwall?
Yeah. Camborne School of Mining. Yeah. It's very, very prestigious.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I was interested in. But I was really interested in things like minerals. I find it amazing that everything around us, like whether you like the context of it or not, is the product of some form of extraction and mining. Even food and farming is, in essence, a form of mining. And I think that was probably the step that like I took, where I really enjoyed this industry. I loved the science behind it. I thought it was fascinating that all of this stuff was in the ground and we could take it out and make it into things. But I personally found it really depressing that we take those things and then it goes to landfill, and that's kind of it. Like just wasn't really much of a cycle, I suppose. It's very linear. We take and there's no opportunity to kind of give back. And it's quite an aggressive form of taking something from the land, something that I loved and wanted to know more about. I was now kind of like doing it in a exploitative context, I guess. And yeah, so I got to travel to these amazing places, but I think it just started to kind of weigh on me that I'm going to these places because we're looking at essentially digging massive holes in them. And yeah, I think after a while that kind of started to kind of weigh on me quite a bit. And I was offered voluntary redundancy. The industry was kind of on a bit of a downturn at that time. And I just thought this is probably a good opportunity to get out and do something else. And at that point, I'd started becoming quite interested in farming, just because farming was very similar to, or at least a lot of what I was getting quite interested in was, or the answer I wanted was, how can I do something that's like a form of taking something out of the ground and making it into something, but also something I can put some like back into. So that's where I kind of then led into farming and agriculture. Naturally, it started as an interest in soil science. I deludedly applied for a PhD in soil science, and they were like, no, you have no credentials, you don't know anything. And I was like, yes, that is true. But you've got to try. And but yeah, that just kind of is where it started. So when I became redundant, I just kind of got stuck into trying to learn more about the food industry. I used to work at a place called Harpenden, which people probably know. It's the home of Rockhampstead Research.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should admit this, but I just used to go in during my lunches and go sit in talks as a non-student, or I had no affiliation to it. So I don't know if I should admit that, but maybe that's a check your security, because I just walked in.
Maybe listen in, Robinson people.
Well, I was just, I was like, well, my work is here and this is here and it's a walk away. Like, why not give it a go? And yeah, it worked. So, I just tried to expose myself to as much of the industry as possible. I applied for loads of different jobs within it. Things for like, I think I applied for like Berry World, which again, they were like, why? You have no background in it. They entertained me, and like my rejection was just, you don't know anything. I was like, yeah, that is fine. You are well within your rights to say that, but I'm willing to learn. When like trying to apply for jobs, probably with like no credentials whatsoever, I started to realize that just wasn't going to happen. That's when I just started actually like trying to volunteer at different places. I would email and call farmers. I was living in Hertfordshire at that point. And I'd just go and like, I'd ask them like, can I take you for like a coffee? And can you just tell me about what you do? So I went to loads of different places. Like luckily Hertford's got loads of like farming. So yeah, I just went to lots of different people. Everyone's advice was mostly like, don't do this. And it's just like, you'll make no money. You'll be stressed all the time. And they are right. This is true.
Well, that's a bit of a shame, though. That because
I think I've maybe just met some miserable people, but it's good to have the realist.
Yeah, I mean, in the last episode, actually, we were talking with Ed Munt because he simply wasn't from a farming background at all, and we were talking about sort of how you start building a network in farming, how you sort of get to know people, other people sort of doing it, and how they can show you the ropes or give you a step in or one of those. So I mean, so on that, I mean, apart from those conversations, I mean, you are where you are now, so I'm guessing you didn't listen to those people. But was there any sort of inspiration to get you in?
I just think I was so hell bent on doing something in food that I was just going to do it. Plus, I've been offered voluntary redundancy twice, and the second time was they thought I had a problem with authority, and I was like, I think you are correct. So anything anyone tells me, I will not listen to it, and I will go and do the opposite. So that's why I'm here, through stubbornness of someone saying, maybe you shouldn't do this. I was like, well, I'm going to. But across that like journey and time of like going to lots of different farms, lots of different things, working in like food in lots of different ways as well. I got exposed to people that did enjoy it as well. And I just loved it. I knew I wanted to work outdoors. It's why I did geology in the first place. I wanted to work outdoors. I couldn't see how I could do that job in a way that felt a little bit more like aligned with how I wanted to like contribute to the world. But yeah, kind of during my early 20s, during that time I used to do like writing for food blogs. I was doing everything just to try and get as much insight into the industry as possible. I volunteered at food banks. I ended up getting a job in food policy. I worked in food software and just tried to get as much of a broad range of things. And when I got that job in food policy, I was there for a couple of years. And I think that was where it really kind of hit home. And I learned a lot there because we were talking about farming and agriculture and a lot of the issues. But it did feel very, or at least for me, didn't feel right to just be moaning about the industry with no knowledge of it. I think it's very easy to, and this is an opinion I have in general, but I think it's very easy to sit outside of the actual context of the job and have an opinion on it.
Yep.
And I don't think you can have that unless you've done the work. And so, yeah, I think I just realized that change, or the change I want to be part of, is like a bottom up change. I didn't want to do the whole schmoozing, and it's just a different world that just didn't fit right with me as well. Plus I just didn't really like talking to people, having to try and be nice to this person because they're part of this organization. And it was like, it didn't feel real. And I think that's why I struggled with that world. It didn't feel real.
So were you volunteering at the social enterprise allotment at that time, or did that come after then?
That came coincided together. So I was working for the food research collaboration at the Centre for Food Policy for a couple of years, and they used to host a lot of events. And at one of the events, I'd met the person that was running the community gardening project, Audacious Veg, at the time in East London. And we got talking, we hit it off really well. And one of the things we were talking about was just, these events aren't very good, are they? Like, just a lot of talking and not doing the stuff. And she was there because she was trying to get funding, and like trying to meet people, like, do that type of work of, you've got to do the socializing and the networking. And I was there because it had to be for work. So yeah, that's when I then actually started growing. She needed some help with like IT stuff. I'd worked in software, so I knew how to like build websites and kind of do all of that type of stuff. So yeah, I ended up volunteering there started in like 2016. And that's when I kind of, really got the bug, and I was like, I don't want to do my actual job. But for a little while I had to, because I had no money. I still don't.
Yeah.
But, but yeah.
So take us from that point to when you and your partner at the time secured your current land.
Yeah, so I'd been at Audacious Veg for I think about 3 years at that point, but within the second year, that's when we had taken it over. So the person that was running it was quite burnt out, wanted to move on to something else, and had asked, was like, do you want to run this project? So deludedly said, yeah, go on then, give it a go. Did that for a couple of years. And it was almost like a good way to kind of test of like, oh, I think there might actually be something here. Like there's a bit of a niche that seems to be wanted. So the land, at that point, we realized that it was never going to work on such a small plot of land for two people. And then that's when we went to the Oxford Real Farming Conference just to kind of figure out, how might we do this? And at that point, it was like a 10-year plan. Because, it's not cheap to buy land. It's quite hard to get access to land. And especially when you don't know the industry, you don't know, like, how do you get land? I'm still not even really sure how to answer that question now. So we just met the right people who had like a good offer. We applied for one of their land plots and went through like a year-long process of business plans, meetings. They came to see the plot that we were working on in East London, more interviews, and then got offered the land, I think in August 2019, and then slowly kind of moved here, but literally moved on site March 24th, 2 days before lockdown. So that whole business plan was thrown out the window, along with all the money that had also just been thrown out of the window to commit to the deposit on this, and the polytunnels and the compost. And so it was the beginning of what was going to be like a pretty tough tough journey, riddled with like a lot of like stress and, yeah, it was, pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the business and starting the business critically as well through that COVID period, um, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was a bit of a risky strategy that would kind of come with as well. It was a bit of a, oh, well, we've got people that we're selling stuff to in London, so we'll just like rely on that whilst we build up a base in Sussex. And then when that was kind of taken away overnight, it was like, what have we done? So really the first kind of few months was, well, to be fair, not even the first few months, the first year, we couldn't do anything anyway because we couldn't get water because no one was working. So we couldn't get any water installed. So couldn't grow anything anyway. So a lot of the work just went into, we had like 8 grand and it was just trying to live off that for as long as possible.
Wow.
And then just trying to sell the farm, which is probably why we ended up going down the route of trying to set too much up. Because we wanted to like hit it really, really hard when things did bounce back. All of the beds had been made, all of the tree planting had been done, all of this was done. It was just, let's do business. Hopefully things open up again in 2021. But it was really difficult. We had to go on universal credit at that point. We were living on pretty much like nothing. Fortunately, there was like a small window where restaurants did open for a bit, and someone that we were working with in London had just moved and started a business down here. Shrub, who are like my biggest wholesaler, pretty much I work kind of with them almost exclusively.
Yeah.
If that hadn't have happened, like there's no way that this would have worked. But it was a case of like we ended up doing everything and anything, like posting bouquets, posting edible flower boxes to like people that were still making cakes, trying to sell to restaurants, selling to the local pubs, selling to the local shops. And it was so many different things and it was so much stuff to manage. Because everything takes different growing techniques. If you're growing cut flowers, you've got to grow differently to how you're growing for edible flowers. Even if it's the same plant, the way you cut it is going to be different. The way you water it will be different. So we were trying to do everything. And honestly, I think we were growing like well over 100 different plants. And it was,
Wow.
But it was just in response to, we've got to try and do something. And I don't think it's not really until a few years kind of later as you kind of look back at it and you think it was really rough. We kept trying. I think we both probably had like fooled ourselves a little bit in terms of like just head down, go, because there just wasn't the opportunity to really sit down and properly take care of yourself. But yeah, it wasn't, I look back at it now and I'm kind of like, I don't know how we did it, but there wasn't a choice. Like you had to make something work.
Super tough. Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialise in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organisations and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast, you're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk.
It had been quite a journey, and I suppose in the last kind of year and a half or so, as restaurants have really bounced back, I've really been able to like push the business into that market, and it's become one of the like 4 names that people go to for edible flowers, a lot of that speaks to, I feel like I'm not very good at doing the whole like bigging up, but it speaks a lot to the quality
Do it.
being put out there. And I think that's probably the only way that it survived, of just finding a niche, doubling down on it, but being an absolute perfectionist about it, and making sure that it's the best of the best that goes out there, and that kind of paid off. But it, have paid for it in other ways.
Really difficult. I'm going to throw a big question at you. When this is about farming, growing generally. Um, Biggest issue in farming or growing generally for you today? It could be anything. What would it be? What particular area would you like to get on your soapbox about?
Oh, I've got so many to choose from.
I
Um,
know.
okay, really don't like social media. And I know I do it and I know
Go
I
for
play
it.
the game because I have to. It is very, and I feel like the only time I go on it is because I'm angry and I'm moaning about something. But I
The
wish,
algorithm will love you.
yeah, I know, right? Yeah, negativity sells. And um, um, I think when I first started, I probably did fall for the big market gardeners selling the idea of you can make £100,000 on like this in your first year. And I didn't fully buy into it because I'm not a fool, but you do believe that it's easy because they all sell the idea that it's easy. And they sell the idea that it's easy because, like really they're making their money from courses and not from the actual context of the thing that they're selling courses on.
Yep.
And I think it's really dangerous for prospective people coming in because that's what they look at. And I've seen it several times now with people that I've seen come into the industry. They lapped up everything that they saw on social media. They paid £2,000 for a course and then they're out of business within a couple of years because because doing a course like with someone that's in another country, in another context and has an established market and an established name who is actually making their money on courses, it's just selling a lie. And this is across so many industries. It's in the fitness industry, it's in
Yeah,
investing,
absolutely.
it's everywhere. But I just really wish that there was maybe a bit more truth. And I think, and unfortunately, I think the people that are doing the actual work, we don't have the time to like come on social media and like talk about stuff or try and debunk some things or try and add a bit more like realness into it. And it's also, I think I used to try and do that a lot. And then I realized that actually like social media just makes me really, really anxious and I get really nervous about it. And yeah, so I do some of it because sometimes I get so riled up and I feel like I need to say something, but I just wish that people didn't fall for it because and I think sometimes when people are selling this idea that this job is easy and, all it is floating around with I don't know, basket, picking this and that, it also just devalues our work. And then I think that stems further because if our work is devalued because it's presented as being easy, then people don't want to pay us the prices that we're asking for because, well, I saw it on this thing and that looks quite easy. And it's like, yeah, but that's not real life. But people think it's real life. And there's just such a devaluation that comes from it that I think people don't really see.
How
And
do you
that's
think that can be challenged?
frustrating. Um, I think some of it is like showing the actual ins and outs of what we do. So, something like Farm 24 was really good. I didn't get fully stuck in, but partly because I was at a wedding on the day. So, and then my internet stopped. So, but I think that was a really good campaign to get people to basically see like what we're doing on a daily basis. It's again, it's that problem of we're doing the work. So a lot of us just don't have the time to then go and add this other element to it to then talk about it and try and show the process of our work so you can build up an appreciation of how hard it actually is. So yeah, I don't really know what the solution is. I think some is like people that are consuming this content to, I don't know, like a bit of a pinch of salt of, this isn't real life. Like no one's walking around a farm in like these really nice pristine clothes and using all of it. Like maybe ask some questions and a bit of critical thinking there. But at the same time, I do think, and I don't really know how you get around it at all. It's so like, especially in terms of like the courses territory, it's so unregulated. And I don't really know what the answer is to that, but there are so many people selling stuff without the credentials or just selling stuff that's been nicked from someone else. I know people that have done that and they've just changed a few words and then they've sold it as their own. There needs to be something that like stops that. And I suppose that's, where things like actual horticultural courses or universities and
Yeah.
things that are like rigid, that's where that kind of comes in. But then, you've also got the barrier that the cost of that is a lot more. So it's a really hard one to figure out. I have no answers, just a lot of moaning.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. We're gonna have to wrap this up. I can't believe how quickly time has gone.
No.
I know, but honestly, I've loved hearing your story. I'm going to ask you the final questions that I ask everyone when they come on the show. The first is, Sinead, if you had a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
I think my message would be just to really support people that grow. It's really tough. It's really tough. Prices are really low and we're constantly being like pushed down, and a lot of us are kind of struggling in very different ways. And I think, if you could change a buying habit to buy something from a local producer that you've done the vetting and you know that they're good and they're honest, like maybe just make one little change and support them if you can. Like just divert a little bit of your income into something that someone that you've done the work to know that they're doing something that you really do sit behind, and want to champion. Because yeah, a lot of people are finding it tough, and we do need public to like come behind us and not just, I don't know, be all talk. We need the action.
And a message for farmers and growers.
Please look after yourself. I know that sounds so cliche, but as someone who's like struggled a lot mentally and with their mental health, especially in the last year, I really wish I asked for help before it got to a point where it was a bit too late. And like now people know that I need help, because it exploded. Like I don't want to keep seeing people go through that trajectory, because there's so much that we're holding and so much stress that we're holding, but it's also an industry where we just keep a lot to ourselves and we're very stoic, and just ask for help. There's no shame in it. Actually, the shame comes from not asking for help.
We'll leave it there. Sinead, thank you so much for coming on the show and for telling us about your amazing journey into farming and growing. I'm sure you clearly got a lot ahead of you, and you've been through a lot. But I'm sure that bright days ahead, hopefully. So best of luck from me.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to have these conversations. And remember that I do like this job.
Yes, you do.
Yeah,
you do. Remember that.
Yeah.
That is it for today. Big thanks to my guest, Sinead Fenton, for coming on the show. Thank you for listening. Next time, we'll be in Yorkshire, and I'll be speaking with Holly Moscrop. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.